The strongest weapon of the 21st century doesn't explode. It doesn't fire. It doesn't bleed. It's green, it's global, and it's everywhere. The US dollar. This isn't just about economics, it's about control. Today we explore how a piece of paper evolved into the world's most powerful geopolitical weapon, and why many nations now want a way out. Welcome to A Brief Story. As World War II neared its end, 44 Allied nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new financial world order. The goal? Avoid the chaos of the interwar years, and America had a plan. The US dollar would be tied to gold. All other currencies would be tied to the dollar. With most countries ravaged by war and America holding 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, few objected. This gave the US unmatched leverage. By controlling the currency that all others referenced, it could indirectly influence every economy that signed up. The dollar became not just money, but the foundation of global finance. The system worked until 1971, when the US abandoned gold convertibility. But by then, the dollar was too embedded to fall. The dollar didn't just win, it was built to dominate. In 1973, after the oil embargo shocked the West, the US struck a quiet deal with Saudi Arabia. Price oil only in dollars, and America would provide military protection. It was genius. Any country that wanted to buy oil, everyone, now needed US dollars. This created near-constant global demand for dollars. Oil revenues came back to US banks as Petrodollars, fueling loans, investments in the treasury market. Even countries that didn't like the US had to use its currency just to keep the lights on. By the 1980s, the petrodollar system was so entrenched that the dollar was the default in oil, debt, and reserves. It was no longer just a currency. It was fuel, capital, and safety, all rolled into one. Controlling oil meant controlling energy. Controlling the dollar meant controlling oil. In 1979, after Iran's revolution and hostage crisis, the US imposed economic sanctions. It froze $12 billion in Iranian assets, a preview of how financial pressure could replace direct military force. More would follow. In the 1990s and 2000s, the Clinton and Bush administrations expanded sanctions against Iraq, Sudan, North Korea, and others. But under Obama and Trump, the dollar became a true weapon. The 2010s saw secondary sanctions, where even foreign firms could be punished if they did business with sanctioned entities. Because most global trade clears in dollars, the US could block countries from banking, borrowing, and even importing essentials without ever firing a shot. Iran lost 80% of its oil revenue. Venezuela's economy collapsed. North Korea turned inward. Sanctions showed that control of the dollar meant control of nations. SWIFT, launched in 1977, is a messaging network used by banks to move money across borders. It doesn't hold funds, but it tells banks where to send them. The US doesn't own SWIFT, but it can pressure it. In 2012, under US and EU pressure, SWIFT cut off Iranian banks. That move crippled Iran's ability to trade globally. In 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, major Russian banks were also ejected from SWIFT. Almost overnight, their financial arteries were cut. This signaled a dangerous truth. The global banking system isn't neutral. The US can flip a switch and isolate entire economies. Russia, China, and others took note. SWIFT is just plumbing, but the US holds the valve. In February 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, the US and its allies froze more than $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves. This was unprecedented. Foreign reserves were once considered untouchable, safe even in wartime. This changed everything. Countries began questioning whether their own dollar reserves were really theirs. Could the same happen to them in a future dispute? China, which holds over $800 billion in US treasuries, started diversifying. India ramped up gold purchases. Brazil made yuan deals. Reserve currencies are built on trust. Freezing Russia's assets may have protected Ukraine, but it shook that trust across the world. The dollar's strength lies in trust, and trust can be broken. In recent years, the U.S. has explored a central bank digital currency, CBDC, a digital version of the dollar. Unlike crypto, it's state-controlled. Proponents argue it could modernize payments. Critics fear it could expand surveillance. A digital dollar could allow real-time taxation, automatic stimulus, or precise targeting of relief. But it could also track every transaction. If paired with sanction tools, it could freeze individuals and institutions instantly without due process. Meanwhile, China has already launched a digital yuan in pilot zones. The race for programmable currency is on, and the implications for freedom, privacy, and financial autonomy are massive. A digital dollar isn't just efficient, it could be absolute control. China has been slowly reducing its dependency on the dollar. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, it has offered loans in yuan. It created the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIPS, a rival to SWIFT. In 2023, China and Brazil agreed to settle trade in yuan. Saudi Arabia signaled openness to selling oil in non-dollar currencies. Russia, shut out of SWIFT, now settles energy trades with India and China using rupees and yuan. While the yuan isn't globally dominant yet, the momentum is growing. More countries are seeking alternatives, not to dethrone the dollar, but to reduce its power. The world doesn't need to kill the dollar. It just needs to bypass it. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, have long discussed alternatives to dollar hegemony. In 2023, they began exploring a shared digital currency backed by a basket of commodities and member currencies. This isn't about replacing the dollar tomorrow, it's about creating options. A BRICS-backed currency could reduce reliance on the IMF or World Bank, institutions often tied to U.S. influence. At the 2023 Johannesburg Summit, BRICS expanded to include 6 new members, including Saudi Arabia and Iran. That's oil, population, and resources outside the dollar's grip. The world wants balance, and BRICS is testing the scales. Despite growing frustration, the US dollar remains the undisputed backbone of global finance. As of 2024, it accounts for nearly 60% of all official foreign exchange reserves. Almost 90% of international forex transactions involve the dollar. Whether it's oil, gold, semiconductors, or even wheat, the dollar remains the default pricing currency. Even countries not aligned with US policy hold vast amounts of dollar-denominated assets. Why? Trust, depth, and liquidity. The US bond market is the largest and most stable in the world. American financial institutions are deeply entrenched in global markets. And in times of crisis, like the 2008 crash or the COVID-19 pandemic, investors still flee to the dollar for safety. But this very dominance creates dependency. Nations must rely on a system they don't control. And recent years have shown that access can be revoked, suddenly and politically. The dollar gives the US global reach, but also breeds global unease. The dollar rules today not just because it's strong, but because the world lacks a safer alternative. The US dollar isn't going anywhere soon, but its monopoly on global trust is fading. Countries are actively building backup plans. China and Russia are deepening financial cooperation. India is pushing for rupee-based trade. Even longtime US allies are seeking autonomy in payments. Technology is speeding this up. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, offer a way to bypass the dollar system entirely. Projects like China's digital yuan and India's e-rupee show that alternatives are no longer theoretical. They're being tested in the real world. What's changing is not the dollar itself, but its perception. Once seen as neutral, it's now viewed by many as a political instrument. That shift matters, because in finance, perception drives behavior. The coming world may not be anti-dollar, but it will be multi-option. Nations want flexibility. That doesn't mean the dollar collapses. It means it shares space. The dollar won't fall, but it won't stand alone. The dollar isn't just paper, it's leverage, it's loyalty, it's control. And every time it's used to punish, others find a reason to resist. Because in a world where money is a weapon, sooner or later, someone builds armor.